Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Darren Tolley and I'm one of the account managers here at EBS, your experienced technology partner. Established over 40 years ago, EBS provides support for business management systems such as Sage 50 and Sage 200. In addition, we provide infrastructure support and managed services covering security, cloud hosting and Microsoft 365. We are pleased to be joined by Sicon, one of our long-standing partners who provide a portfolio of add-on solutions for Sage 200. Today, we are focusing on the Sicon Distribution modules, which provide an enhanced user experience across sales, purchasing, and stock. We are recording today's session, and we'll make this available to you over the next few days so that you can re-watch and/or share it with your colleagues. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the demonstration, or put any queries into the chat. Without further ado, I will pass you over to Steve Gemmout, Sicon's Sales Manager. Steve.
Thanks, Darren. And thank you all for joining today. As Darren said, if you've got any questions, throw them in the chat. Darren, if they're coming and you want to interrupt again, just do that. But let's just check the technology works to begin with. So let me just share my screen, and hopefully I just enable this. Can you see the Sicon website, Darren?
Yeah, I can see that.
Perfect. So what I'll do, let me turn off my camera just to save any bandwidth for anybody. And of course, you can focus on my screen. So just in terms of what we're going to run through today, brief introduction of Sicon, just so for those of you who perhaps haven't come across us as a brand before, you can understand how we work in the EBS and the Sage ecosystem. And then we'll talk about distribution, the key elements, and then the fun stuff, or fun as I think it, will run through just some of the examples so you can see some of the screens and how that interacts with other areas of Sage. So Sicon, we are as it says at the top there now, we are a Sage Tech Partner Plus. Essentially, we're a developer partner of Sage. We're accredited to create add-ons for Sage 200, something which we've done as a business for in excess of 20 years. We only develop currently for Sage 200. And all of the modules you can see listed there on my screen are designed to complement Sage 200 in some way. Some of them are vertical specific, so construction, barcoding and warehousing, distribution, hire, etc. And some just enhance for Sage, document management, OCR, that sort of thing. So what is distribution? Now, it used to be a large solution which had lots of different add-ons in it. We actually split that down then into two, but we made the decision a couple of years ago to break it into 9 separate elements. So it's a bit like a pick and mix. You pick the elements that are relevant for you for your particular project, rather than buying a solution where you're only going to use one element. So we can see the 9 aspects there, and feel free to visit the Sicon website to have a look at this. There's even help and user guides if you find distribution, which will show you screenshots and descriptions. So it's a great resource and you don't have to register. So let's just talk through them, but I'm actually not going to do this in order. What I'm going to talk about is probably the order of popularity, Darren, I think makes sense here. So in terms of the most popular ones, first one would be material planning. So for those of you who use Sicon manufacturing, you've got MRP. This is a cut down version of that. So there's not the capacity planning. If you need material planning to work with manufacturing or kitting, then you would use the full flavor one. But this is perfect for customers wanting to utilize the engine of the solution here for it to predict and tell you what purchase orders you need to place and when you should place them. Tying quite nicely in with that is future sales. Now there's 2 sides to it. Typically the most used aspect is around the minimum stock calculation. So from a material planning perspective, that's designed to keep you at or above typically your minimum stock levels. While future sales, we can look at historical demand, and based on a calculation, and again we'll run through what that is a little bit later, the system can suggest whether you should increase or decrease that minimum stock level based on churn. And then of course we can update those stock records en masse. So certainly those 2 are very popular. Recently, container management is a key add-on that we got within distribution. So it's perfect for those of you who are bringing containers into the country, perhaps from the Far East, whether that's one PO per container or whether it's multiple POs but split different lines across the PO, this module is absolutely perfect. We're also then tracking those containers and also goods receiving that in. The other one that tends to be very popular is pre-allocation management. Now, a number of our solutions already have pre-allocations built in. So, for example, material planning, you generate purchase orders because we know what sales orders, for example, that was for. It creates a pre-allocation. But what pre-allocation management does, it allows you then to manage those further, create ad hoc pre-allocations. So perhaps your sales team are taking a call. We haven't got stock, but we can see there's a purchase order due in at the end of the week. Actually being able to pre-allocate that customer's line on there. So when we goods receive the stock, it's automatically allocated. We've ring fenced it. Others that we have then, if I just scroll up a bit, we've got SOP management. So these, there's a series of additional buttons that we add onto a sales order to make onboarding of orders quicker, but whilst providing visibility. And probably my favorite screen in distribution, if it's not too not too sad to have a favorite screen, where we can look at what we call back orders and quickly remove and add allocations as well. So we'll touch on that. POP management is what makes sense on the purchasing side. So a number of different screens. The key one in there would be advanced landed costs or supplier quantity breaks in there as well, and a lovely little inspection of goods feature. So again, we can touch on that as well. Stock matrix is quite niche, but for those of you who perhaps in the clothing industry, you need to create stock items. It might be polo shirts, so you've got different colors, different sizes maybe. So being able to create those stock items, but then on the sales orders you're onboarding, have a matrix, and you say, well, the customer wants 3 extra large blue, they want 2 large red, then quickly add those to the sales order. Reserves and call-offs ties in quite nicely actually with material planning. It's some people call it purchase sales contracts, which is what we've called it here. Others might call it call-off orders, but it's essentially creating say, for example, a purchase contract to say from this supplier, we guarantee that we're going to buy 1,000 of an item, and they'll give us a discounted price. Now, some of you might say, well, we just create a purchase order and then call off that purchase order. Well, you can do that, but when you run material planning, what you need to know is, well, when should I call it off in order to get the stock in on time to cover future demand? But because you've got a purchase order on there, the system, you've got enough stock coverage, but so it's not going to suggest when you need to place it. So by creating this purchase contract, you can then run material planning. It's going to suggest and place tell you to place a purchase order for 50. But as you place the PO, it's then going to update the report to say, well, you promised you're going to order 1,000 this year. You've now ordered 50, and you can see where you are with those. So again, a really nice, useful one. And then last, but by no means least, warehouse replenishment. For those customers perhaps using Sicon barcoding, you'll already have seen the stock shortage. That's easier said than done. Stock shortage screen. This takes it one step further. So that screen is in there, but it looking at again the minimum levels and suggesting what you need to transfer from one warehouse to another to replenish, and then creating that stock transfer as well. So we'll switch over and do a bit of a demonstration. We'll actually start with future sales. We'll move into material planning. We'll cover that one off. We'll look at container management and pre-allocations, and then we'll just run through some of the others. Perfect. Any questions coming on the chat at all so far, Darren?
Well, you've answered one of the queries basically about resource planning. Is it the same as the one in the manufacturing module? That's it so far.
Excellent. Okay.
There is one about future sales, but again, it's probably more relevant after we've run through future sales, I would think.
Okay, no worries. We'll hold that, but yeah, keep the questions coming thick and fast as you think of them. Okay, so Sage 200, I have got every single Sicon add-on installed, which is why my menu is far busier than yours. But distribution, other than the fact it says Sicon Distribution, once it's installed, you won't necessarily know that it's not a Sage module. It's going to interact the same way. So I mentioned future sales. So the first for the future sales, there's actually two options. Most used would be calculate min stock levels, but there is a sales order forecast. So we'll touch on min stock levels first. And I'm just going to filter this for one of my product groups, and I'm going to click on display. And whilst that's running through, I'm going to explain what it's doing. So out of the box, when I run this, it's looking at your stock history, and it's looking at the last rolling 13 weeks. Now we can override it. So for those of you who are seasonal, we can put a date range in. So for example, if I was in the retail sector, I might start looking at next quarter, but by analysing the same quarter but last year, if that makes sense, it's then going to give me the average monthly demand during that period, and that's what it's going to base the suggestion on. So it's going through every single stock item at every single warehouse location, and it's going to come back listed with all the information within the screen here. So let's just wait for that to finish. And there's the results. And really what we're looking for are the big swings in change. So for example, the one at the top here, our current minimum stock for the main warehouse is 100. We haven't got any in stock at the moment, but if I look here, the last rolling 13 weeks, even the last year, the last 2 years, we've had no sales. So based on the calculation, as I said, I will tell you what that is in a moment. System's quite simply suggesting that we change the minimum forecast to 0. Because if we think about when we run material planning, that's going to look to keep us at or above our minimum. We don't want to be ordering 100 because we're just going to have stock sat on the shelf. If I flip it around and we look at the other side of it, what we can see here is our current minimum stock for this one is 50, this one's 109, but we can see our demand in the last 13 weeks has jumped up. So the system's suggesting that we actually increase our forecasted minimum. Now what I can do is I can click on some of these blue hyperlinks. It's going to open up Sage's monthly trading figures, but we have enhanced this. So we've added some graphical phasing. Now we're only interested in usage. That's what it's going to be based on. And usage is sales order dispatches. It could be write-offs. It could be issues, BOM issues, that sort of thing. And by giving us the phasing, we can see, are there any hockey sticks? But actually, for me, that's not really telling me too much. So where you've got the history, if I go back 2 years and I look at the same set of information, I can now start to see, you know, is it a regular spike? Is it a hockey stick we tend to have? Is it something seasonal? So actually the same period, we always have an increase. So again, providing those tools. Now, if we have a look down here and we look at show the calculations, this is how it's working it out. So demand is usage. Lost orders is an option within SOP management where we can record a lost order, and then certain ones we can select to be included in this, typically no stock, because of course you want to make sure that you're mopping any of those up in future. So there's our average demand during the last 13 weeks, or it would be during that period. Working days in the month, I've set, it's a system setting, I've set it to 21, gives us an average daily demand. The lead time from the preferred supplier is 15 days, and we've set a safety margin of 50%. So we're looking to have 22.5 days coverage. And with rounding, there's our min stock forecast. Now we can override the safety margin. There's a global setting. We can override it on the supplier. We can also override it on the stock item, and it will take the stock item first, if not the supplier. And then if not, then the system default. So for example, you might have a very reliable supplier, but it's a difficult product to get hold of. So you might set a safety margin of 100% for that. Or it might be a supplier that's slightly unreliable, so set it on the supplier, and that way it saves you going through every single one of their stock items. If you're happy with the ones, you simply select them, select update minimum, and it's going to go through for each of the stock items for those warehouse locations and update those minimum levels before we run MRP. The difference between that and the sales order forecasts is, and I will just run this for one of my stock items, is again, this is going to use historical information and bring us back essentially what sales we had during that particular time. Sorry, what am I doing here? We can click on there. We can start to see some of the spikes there as well. There are options where we can exclude certain statistics if it's outside of a normal range, so perhaps it's a bit of a spike, that sort of thing. And then you can generate a forecast, and what it does is it will analyze the last 3 months with 3 months before. Are we going to grow? And it will predict, but you can add your own growth percentage, and it will then just create a forecast for future months. And once that's generated, that actually then drops into material planning. Oh, sorry, that particular one there, and into this manual forecast. There's two ways of doing it. My preferred would be probably the minimum, makes more sense. But there is the other option for those of you who forecast out. So a great utility for doing the analysis, and of course you go through each of your stock items. Depending on your churn, you might run that once a month and just adjust it each month. But again, it will differ possibly for your sector. So that's future sales. So let's move on to material planning. Now, material planning, as I mentioned earlier, it is the
Sorry,
same.
Steve, can I just interrupt there? We've got a question about future sales.
Yeah.
So would future sales, if we implement it, work straight away, or do we have to wait like 13 weeks for it to actually build up the information?
I'm assuming, Darren, you're talking about, or the person who's asked the question is talking about a fresh install of Sage. Yes, if there's no sales history or usage history, then yes, you are going to have to build that up and wait at least 13 weeks. For those existing customers putting it into their current Sage solution, and perhaps you've been a customer using Sage 200 for a couple of years, you can literally drop it in and you could run it there, and then it's not going to make any changes because, of course, as you saw, you're in total control. But yeah, it does have to have the data in there in order to be able to be effective.
Okay, and if I don't have MRP, then, or resource planning, then I can still use future sales to set the stock levels.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can use any of the distribution to buy standalone. The only reason I show it in this order is it makes sense, in terms of tying that route through. It makes sense that updating it kind of goes hand in hand with material planning, in my opinion, because what you're doing is, if you run, as I've got my system here, this based on minimum levels, and let me just turn this off here, it makes sense then that it's going to be ordering more to give you more coverage for the faster moving goods, and if it's items which you sell very rarely, it's going to suggest your minimum stock level being 0, so you buy to order. So it does time really nicely. But yeah, you could buy it standalone if you wanted to. So material planning, what is it doing? So it's taking into consideration a number of elements. So it's looking at every single stock item in your system. It's analyzing them. It's looking at in my example here, because this is how I've run it, it's looking at the minimum stock level for every warehouse location against each stock item. It's then using what we call future stock movement screen. So it's looking at opening free stock balance. It's going to ignore anything that's been allocated. You've ring-fenced that. It's only interested in the free available stock. It's then going to look at future demand. So, for example, it might be a sales order that we've yet to allocate to, which would decrease it. It might be that you've got a stock transfer, for example, if you're using warehouse replenishment. You've got a purchase order on the system that you've yet to receive where stock's going to increase it. And it's looking at what point you may drop below that minimum. And if it sees you going to, then it will work backwards. So when should you place your PO based on the supplier's lead time? And that can be calendar days or working days. Working days is Monday to Friday, 2-day weekend. It's going to look at things like usual order quantity. So do you have to order in multiples of 50? It's going to look at your perhaps a minimum order quantity. So if you've got to place an order for 1,000 as a minimum run, but then you could order 1,001, 1,002. It's going to take all of those elements into consideration and come back with suggestions. Now, my demo data, as is demo data, a lot of stuff in the past, but you will get things like you might get suggested purchase order may not arrive in time for a works order. So I've got manufacturing installed. As I said, it's the same tool. It's just the distribution one is a cut down version, wouldn't look at works orders. You might have suggested purchase order may not arrive in time for a sales order. Purchase orders are overdue. So you're going to get a number of different messages. And if you double click on any of these, then what it will do is it will open up the future stock movement screen that I mentioned earlier, and you can start to see what's going to be impacted. I will talk about this one again in a bit more detail. Reschedule messages, we've kept very simple. If you've got a sales order on the system, you've got a linked PO with that pre-allocation, we push the sales order out, then you might get a message to say you could reschedule the PO because demand's changed. Suggested stock transfers, if you're using warehouse hierarchy, then stock suggestions of transferring from one of your warehouses to another. There's a lovely traceability inquiry for those using traceability. And then we get down to our POs. Now, we actually split the fulfillment method across 3 tabs, but you can switch them off if they're not relevant. For those of you wondering what I'm on about with fulfillment method, on your sales order, Sage has 3 fulfillment types: from stock, which means you're going to be dispatching it from your stock, direct from the supplier, so you're going to place a PO, tell the supplier, ship it straight to your customer, or supplier via stock, it bounces in, bounces out. Certainly the first and the last tend to be the most popular, but again, in the system settings, you can turn off those tabs, but by separating them, it just makes keeps things tidier for you. Within this particular view, these are the results it's come back. For me, the first column is the key one. We can sort. You'll see here it's telling me that I don't need to place the order for this until 9th of June. That's because we obviously don't need it till the start of July. 15 working day lead time. It's not going to stop me placing it today, but again, it's just suggesting to you. So you can filter up here by just show me the one this week. And we've got some customers will run it on a Monday and then perhaps do a wash up on a Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning. We've got other clients who run it 2-3 times a day. Now I've got about 1,000 stock items, and you can see, you know, it took about a minute for it to run through. You can run it as many times as you want. It does delete the previous suggestion. Obviously, if you've got 3 million stock items, that's going to take longer than my data set. It does depend on the speed of your server, but we are always trying to optimize it. So you've got the date the system recommends you place it, lead time for the preferred supplier, therefore the requested date, which we can change, stock item details, the quantity, which you can overwrite, current stock levels, your preferred supplier. Now, if I pick this one here, for example, I actually know that these 3 are suppliers set up against the stock item because I know AB Cookies is the first supplier in my purchase ledger. But it means that I could swap a supplier. But the reason we show the rest of the purchase ledger is there might be a supplier that you've not set up in Sage that you need to go to because of lead times, for example. And it does mean that you can select them from the list, get the price, and actually generate a PO without having to amend the stock item. But perhaps the price, perhaps if it's a list price or you want to change the preferred supplier, providing you've got access to be able to do it, then you can, from within the screen, drill down and amend the stock item. So it might be you amend the minimum levels or you amend your preferred supplier. You'd have to rerun MRP for it to pick up the changes, but it does mean you're able to work within here and make changes perhaps for next time you're going to run it. In terms of price, you can override the price, as you can see there. We do try to use some logic. So if you've got list prices set up against your preferred supplier, we'll pull it through from there. If not, price on the most recent open PO, that should be the latest price. Otherwise, we use last buying price or average as a last resort. But again, you can filter by supplier up here to filter down those POs. And then we get to the reasons why. So if I just double click on a couple of these and see if I can talk you through the results. So let's have a quick look here. That's a bad example. Yeah, that's a bad example. So let's try and find one which will make a bit more sense, because that one's got multiple in there. Okay, yeah, this is a good one. So we've got a minimum stock level of 50. We've got a usual order quantity of 50, so we have to order in multiples of 50. And we've got a preferred supplier lead time of 15 days. Now, obviously, I've got some dates in the past. Yours would be in the real world, you know, be suggesting get the stock just in time. But essentially, our opening free stock is 10. We've got 2 for that sales order, 3 for this one, reducing the balance. Minimum stock level of 50. So if we order 50, that will bring us to 52. 52 is above the minimum. The system's happy. You can, if provided you've got permission, we could double click on the sales order, open it and have a look at the details, or even the purchase order. But that's essentially how it's calculating those suggestions. When you're happy and you've made all your changes, you can simply tick the ones that you want to place, click on create purchase orders, and it brings you through to this summary screen. Where they're from the same supplier for the same delivery location, in this example, I'd end up with 2 purchase orders. those top 3 lines on one PO, and then for Blackburn's the one at the bottom there as well. So the idea is it's doing the donkey work for you in terms of farming and giving you those suggestions. You're in total control, which I think is always quite key. And then you can place and generate the POs. So the system's not going to go off and automatically do that. There are other features where we can create suggested purchase orders in here and add other stock items to maximize the delivery location. We do link with Sicon approvals. So those of you using Sicon approvals with purchase requisitions, we can actually send these requests out to approvals to be approved before we get a PO in stage as well. So lots that we can do, but a very powerful tool. So next one that I wanted to move on to was containers. So containers, what's the idea behind this? As I mentioned before, it's about tracking profiles, so being able to track where the containers are, but also then, pardon the pun, a vessel to house what's on each container. Now it actually starts in the maintenance. There's a few bits of setup. One of those is we'll set up our different container sizes. We can add maximum volume, maximum payload to this. You will also get some options on the stock item to enter the dimensions to give you the volume and also the weight in there. Now it's not an exact science, but because obviously it depends on how you pack it. But as you add stock items to the container, it can then show you when it thinks you're going to be over capacity as well. You'll create tracking profiles. So tracking profiles, for example, here we've got PO ones, I've got container ones. You can have multiple of these. I've got a China one where you can have up to 8 stages. So we're saying here it takes them 5 working days, so Monday to Friday, 2 to weekend, to load it. It's on the sea for 15 consecutive days, 3 working days in customs, 2 working days in the warehouse. So typically a 25-day lead time. And I've got a bulk, which is 41. So you can have tracking profiles against your POs, or you can have tracking profiles against the container. Now, good old Blue Peter fashion. Here's one I did prepare earlier. So what we've got here is an internal container number, but we can put the actual container number in there, the container size, and we've got the original requested delivery date. And based on these stock items, the current volume, and I said they would go red. Values over here, we can also then show the value of the items on there. So of course that's coming from the PO. Perfect for those of you who need to insure the goods when I think it comes out of international water or whatever the rules are these days. To add items in, we can simply just go add. And the real benefit here, if you have a look, we've got different purchase order numbers. We can add different lines from different POs to the order. These ones we can see they're already on there, but yeah, I could add those lines. And what that's doing, that's going to add an extra line to my PO itself if I was to add it properly. As we go through, there's my tracking profile. So, and the idea here is we can say, well, delivery to warehouse. So we anticipated it to be the 13th of May last year. Well, I could actually say we're expecting it now on the 24th. And as I tab through, I can update the PO lines. That's going to update the requested date on the PO line for all of these POs. So something, again, the real benefit is you're not going to have to go through each PO and simply update them. So for example, if I look at PO 4000, if I come away from this, if I just save the container, what we can do find that one there. See, the original date was 2022. If I just amend this, there's my espresso cups. There it is there, 26th of the 5th, 2023. So it's updating the actual line. And this is quite important because, of course, we run MRP. That suggests that purchase order, again, we might need to order some more stock because that's not going to arrive in time. We do as well have some other buttons. So the container history, as we change the container, we can see the container details and who made the change. We can see when it was added to a container as well. We can see when the delivery date has been changed and who made the change as well. And as you're adding an order on, you can add the container over here as well, should you wish. I did mention the tracking details, so you can skip containers and just put the tracking details on there. That's not a problem at all. So again, it's about giving visibility of what's on those containers. There's a couple of other features just in there. I come back to distribution. Within the containers, you can import them. More importantly, we can also receive containers. So this is something that was recently added. For those of you with Sicon barcoding, you can also receive containers. With this installed, you'll get an extra option that appears, which you can enable to receive the container in as well. As you receive it, you'll see the line details on there. So a really nice, powerful utility. Preallocations. So I mentioned we're going to automatically create them, but this does give us the option here to be able to manage those preallocations. So as I click on search, it's going to show me all of the preallocations because I've got manufacturing, we've got works orders pre-allocated, works order line pre-allocated to works orders. We might have works orders pre-allocated to a sales order, that sort of thing as well. And we can create new ones, we can edit them, we can delete them. But the bit I really wanted to touch on was into our sales order. So put on a sales order here, a standard Sage sales order. I'll pick Asda as I always do. This pop-up here and the next one are actually part of SOP management, so we'll talk about those in a moment. As we add the items on, my good old espresso machines, and let's just pretend customer wants 10 and we haven't got 10. Down at the bottom here, if we go to pre-allocations and I click on the drop down, that's going to show me all of the purchase orders we've got on the system that should be coming in with free stock. So I can select a PO, I can create the pre-allocation, tell the customer that's due in on the 26th. And if I click on save, then it's going to create the pre-allocation. The free available stock on that PO will obviously disappear because we consumed all 10 of those. And when it's goods received, it will automatically allocate. So it's great utility from a customer service perspective to do those pre-allocations. You can do it from the purchase order side as well. So building on top of existing functionality, but very powerful for the right customers. I'm actually going to close this sales order and come back in because we've got SOP management. So SOP management, as I mentioned, there's a couple of sides to it. Part of that is a series of utilities on the sales order that will enhance the user's experience. So the first one, put an order on, I've got the customer on the phone perhaps, or it might have come in via email, but I can see sales orders that have yet to be dispatched. So could I tag it on to an order that's due to go out imminently? And then that can pop up. Make sure we select the customer address or fill in analysis codes or see any customer notes before we start putting the order on. So bringing that to the forefront rather than it being something that's forgotten. And then we can start to add items onto the PO. So if I come into the traditional view, again, as I add whatever my stock item is, superseded, that's part of distribution SOP management. So being able to set up superseded and say, well, yeah, should we sell them the coffee filter as well? So do I want to change it? I'm not going to in this instance. It might be, as I said before, we haven't got stock. So if I've got material planning under distribution, we can actually view the future stock movements, but I can also look at previous sales histories and Sage's balances screen as well. But if I have a look over here, we've now got some extra buttons. So things like add history lines. So this is going to show from this particular customer the stock items they've ordered. It's only going to show the last time that they've ordered them, current free stock as well, and the selling price. But we can see when they last bought it, the quantity they had, and the last selling price. So that one where the customer says, "Oh, yeah, I can have the same one I bought last time." Do you remember which one it is? Well, it's nice and visible, and we can just very quickly add the quantities there's our superseded EN, and away you go. I mentioned lost orders. So perhaps we haven't got enough stock, so the customer says, I'll go elsewhere. Well, we can, without saving the sales order, we can save a note that we've lost that particular order. You set it your own drop downs. And as I said, we can pick certain ones that you flag as to be included in minimum stock. We can include that in the future sales calculation. We've got copy lines. So from previous sales orders, being able to copy and add lines to it. Telesales. So a lot of clients like Sage's rapid sales order entry, but it doesn't give you enough granularity. So being able to add stock items on, see the free stock, enter the quantity they want, the price, perhaps any discounts, and just very quickly take the order and add them to it. But again, also recording any lost orders for the lines and seeing the same options depending obviously which distribution modules you've purchased. Templates, not dynamic, but just very quickly, you might have Black Friday specials. So, you know, you want to add them to the order. And probably my particular favorite is this copy and paste. I'm actually going to demonstrate this. So you get an order from your customer and it's very simple. All you need is, now I always get the, I think that's the code, and we'll say 50. So it's literally 2 columns. You need the code and the quantity. You copy that, click on copy and paste, and there you go. That's straight in there. So it's going to use the price obviously from the price book, but it's a great way if you get your orders come in. I think that's a really, really powerful function there. The other side of SOP management, I mentioned probably my favorite option here. If we go into SOP management, would be this manage back orders. If I click on display, this is going to show all of the sales order lines that need stock to be allocated, but also all of the sales order lines that have had stock allocated, but we've yet to dispatch. So my particular thought process here is we can amend serial batch numbers if you're doing it on allocation. But if I filter by stock item, display, perhaps we've got a customer which we need to get an order out quickly. Well, could we rob Paul to pay Peter, one of another phrase? So which of these orders don't need to go out? Actually, those couple quite quickly. And we can just unallocate the selected, that frees up some stock, and then we can allocate it to the orders that need it. So a really nice utility for those perhaps struggling managing the visibility of allocations at the moment. There are a number of other elements in there, but again, that's what I'll cover today. Darren, just before I go into SOP management and a couple of the others, any other questions that have come through on the chat?
Yeah, we've got one more. So do the distribution modules interact with other Sicon modules, such as barcoding?
Yeah, great question. Those who've worked with Sicon for a long time probably already know the answer to this. Yes, we do where either there's been a need or whether it makes sense. So yeah, definitely barcoding, container management, as I mentioned earlier, warehouse replenishment from the stock transfer ties in really quite nicely. Sorry, with the container is obviously receiving the container in. With material planning, obviously because we're generating purchase orders, they could be received in barcoding. As I mentioned, material planning does link to Sicon approvals as well. So yeah, where they need to, absolutely, we do dovetail them in. So there aren't any other questions. We'll have a quick look at reserves and call-offs. So I mentioned this is around your sales and purchase contracts. So the idea behind this is, well, I suppose there's twofold. So if I look at a sales contract first, being able to say, well, who's the supplier? What's the date range that this contract covers? And what items wanted in a price? And we can then see what's been ordered, what's been invoiced. And again, we can see a purchase contract. We also then, from the sales side, can also have a sales contract. And I will pick, let's try this one here, where again, we've got a contract here, going to buy a certain quantity. These are the prices they're going to guarantee. And this is the balance that's remaining. We can see the balance on order. and the status of these sales. Now, what we've actually done, so that's Belfast file, is as we put on a sales order, so I'll pick it this way for the moment, we've also added in a little feature to tie the two. So as I pick Belfast Fire, as I add my coffee cups in, I want 10 of those, for example. If I save, it's going to tell me that we've got a sales contract. Do I want to use the price for that contract? Yes, I do. We can see there's the contract selection, there's the price, and as I select and add it, there's my line with the correct contract price. And if I save this order, so 5711, ignore some of these pop-ups, so there are other Sicon add-ons. If I go back into distribution, sales contract, just amend that contract, we can see immediately now balance on orders is 20, and there it is 5711. So of course on the purchase side, as we generate purchase orders, they're going to drop in. It just gives you that visibility of what's remaining on that particular contract, and we can print contracts out as well. Okay, so POP management. The main one I mentioned in there is landed costs. So we hook off the back of Sage's landed costs. And then for those of you perhaps have looked at it or are currently using Sage's, there's a single landed cost nominal. And it's percentage or value, and it will add, say, 10% on top. It books in the gross and then nets out to the to whatever the nominal. Well, you can have up to 6 landed cost types once this is installed. You set your nominal. So as I said, we will piggyback on the back of that. You figure we use Sage's landed cost warehouses, so none of that changes. But if we have a look at stock control, and I just find my landed cost stock item. Against the stock item, it's the same screen that Sage has. Landed costs, and again, percentage or value. But down here, we've then got the landed costs per supplier, and we can then apportion that. So in this instance, 10%, how's that 10% going to be apportioned? So that's John's imports. If we go and look at our purchase ledger, there he is. And if I just amend the account, there's a bit of setup on the account as well. Under Sicon and distribution, we can again set up the default landed costs. Rather than go through each individual stock item, if you put them on the supplier, we can then update those against all the stock items as well, should we wish. But the idea when we put on a purchase order, see if I've got an existing one. That has been completed, but I'll show you the screen. Under landed costs, as you add all of your items on there, you'll see your provisional totals and the apportioned. Before you goods received, you put in as best a guess as you can what your actuals are going to be. You can apportion that across all the stock items, and when you goods receive, it will book in the gross. And I think it's at the point you do your invoice, then you'll see your nominal postings. So again, just gives you that bit extra granularity. There's a couple of other pieces though in there which you can make use of. That, as I said, that's the one that most customers focus on. But you do get a couple of other nice ones. I mentioned stock inspections. So for those perhaps not using barcoding, who want to inspect stock items, there's the same flag on the stock item. You set up your inspection bin, you set up your quarantine warehouses, but you'd see the products be inspected. You can pass or fail. If you pass, then it moves back into your put away bin. If you fail it, then it will move to the quarantine warehouse and the quarantine bin. So just a nice way of being able to just control that. Quantity breaks. So suppliers, quantity breaks is in there as well. And a couple of nice list views. One of those being purchase order line list view, which obviously don't get saved. There's actually a sales order line list view in SOP Management as well, which is nice being able to see that from the line. And of course, if we've got container, we can see the container in there as well. A few other bits, but those are the major ones. Warehouse, a couple more, and then we can pause for breath, Darren. Obviously, there's a lot to cover, but if we look at warehouse replenishment, those already using other Sicon solutions where we've got this in there will be familiar with this stock transfers, and we'll come back to that. But it's actually the stock replenishment one that I wanted to focus on. So you can create warehouse groups, but it might be there's our source warehouse, there's the destination warehouse. What we can see here is we've got, these are all the mutual stock items. We can see at the destination the minimum levels. This is dropping below the minimum. We've got 10 available, so I can actually say there's a shortage of 10, so I could transfer 10 across, and I can create the transfer. What the transfer does, it drops into the stock shortage transfer over here, where you can then allocate stock, print your pick list, you can dispatch, get a dispatch note, and then flag that you've received it at the other location. But of course, if you're using barcoding or warehousing, then yes, you still do your allocation here. You might still print your pick list and send it down to the warehouse printer, but they can dispatch it from this warehouse. And if you've got somebody with a device at the other end, they can receive those ones in as well. And then last, but by no means least, we've got a stock matrix. So this is where we can, if I pick my group, so if we've got casual shirts, for example, we've got a matrix. What different attributes are we going to have? These are the stock items that are created. So we've got a number of different ones. We can generate stock codes. So that's great, especially if you're adding new ranges. But the idea behind it, if we go back to our sales order list, which I don't seem to have up, is as we add our sales order onto the system, it doesn't really matter who I pick. Got this matrix button, pick my product group, different variants, so I can go large, list view. So that's probably a bad example. There you go. And then what I've got is it short, long, or 3/4 in terms of the collar size across there. So this is where we can have different variants. So well, looking for large and blue. Well, do they want long, 15-inch? And you can start to enter the quantities and add those to your sales order nice and quickly. The last thing, Darren, and then we'll see if there's any questions. I'm conscious of everybody's time and patience sitting through this today. All the way through each of these, well, actually not all of them, but the ones that are relevant. For example, if I go container management, we've got these dashboards. Now, something we've started to add in, but these are just giving some visuals internally. And if I just click on the cog there, being able to say, well, okay, this dashboard, I want 3 quadrants. You can have up to 4. And then what do I want in those? So there are some that come out of the box. We've also got these 5 general dashboards. If I come down to the maintain the dashboard panes, if I just edit this, what's quite clever here is it's all written based on SQL. So what we wanted to do was put a tool in there which, and it doesn't have to be just that module's information, as long as it's data in that database. Darren and the team at EBS will be able to write some SQL. You might have some experts internally, but if you write the SQL and validate it, you can have pie charts, list fields, bar charts. You can then have the system refresh these, and we could just obviously choose to refresh them. And some of them you can even pop out panel, put it onto another screen. So it's a bit of a bonus you get. As I say, there are some out of the box, so containers expected this month, but you can use them so much further. So that's a nice addition. For those of you where you can't wait for distribution and have already got the enhancement pack, I'm not sure which version of it, but certainly in the latest version, there's also some dashboards, same as those in the enhancement pack, that you could make use of that straight away. And breathe. Lot to cover, Darren. So hopefully I haven't missed anything. I mean, there's so much more to it, but for me, it's a really useful set of tools in there. That pick and mix, I think it's great now because we split it a couple of years ago. Choose the elements that are relevant. Obviously, as we spoke about, ties into some of the other Sicon solutions where they need to. But I guess, Darren, are there any questions that have come through the chat?
There's no more new ones. So we've already covered the ones that were in the chat. So yeah, I think we're there or thereabouts. I've got nothing more to add at this point, apart from as you mentioned earlier, the splitting up of the modules basically into sort of, they're in constituent parts has made quite a big difference for our customers, because previously it was quite a large investment for one module, so things like pre-allocation management, which has been quite popular for us.
Yeah, I think for me,
yeah,
I think for me, I mean, I'll always say it was excellent value regardless. But all joking aside, because we had half of it was more the stock side, half of it was more the sales order processing, SOP management type functionality you saw. We did have instances where customers wanted the stock side, but they needed one function from what was called standard at the time. So it was quite a tough sell for them internally to go, we also now need to invest this to get the full system. So you are right, by breaking it down, they can just go, well, material planning, future sales, and SOP management. Well, great. Those you're ticking, you're getting value add from those elements there, and it's far more cost effective. So yeah, probably one of the best moves we've made in a number of years. As I said, have a look at the help and user guides just over here into distribution, pick the relevant area, and there's screenshots, descriptions of the various features as we went through. So useful resource. And as I always say, there's nothing better than perhaps a one-to-one. So if there is anything in here that you'd like to explore a bit further, or have a one-to-one discussion, again, just let Darren and the team know. More than happy to jump on a session.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Steve. It's really appreciated. Just for those watching, we are holding regular webinars on other Sicon products and solutions. So keep an eye on your inbox. We'll send out invitations as and when we're about to run those. And then we can then finish up, and we'll catch you all again soon.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.